All right. Camera's rolling. Audience is awake. Clicker functional. Yeah, let's go. Rightio. So, hello, I'm Brian, and we're speaking today on the future of the enterprise desktop. I tweeted earlier, like 5 minutes ago, that I was really nervous about this presentation because I believe this is, for the most part, new material, except for the slight preview I gave this morning during the keynote. Incidentally, someone mentioned that there's no free Wi-Fi. I might have misspoke during the keynote. We do have Wi-Fi at the front desk. You can get a card if you need it. What I was saying is if you already have BT Open Zone or your room-based Wi-Fi, use that just to prevent us from not having to spend too much on Wi-Fi. But if you don't have that, by all means, go downstairs. And if all 300 people get the Wi-Fi from the front desk, OK, fine, we'll do that. So there's Wi-Fi. So I was also talking earlier about that book, the VDI Delusion. You know, the subtitle of the book, as I mentioned earlier, is Why Desktop Virtualization Failed to Live Up to the Hype and What the Future Enterprise Desktop Will Really Look Like. So the content today is, for the most part, kind of pulled from that book. I guess it kind of parallels our vision we laid out there is the stuff we're sort of talking about now. I guess I'd like to sort of keep this open and just kind of, because I don't know. I mean, you know, I have a track record with future predictions that is not quite perfect. Like, I wrote that by June 28, 2010, VDI will be ready for general desktop replacement. I don't know how that's gone yet. Now, to be fair, part of what would make VDI work, I was talking about layering and offline local VDI. So I guess you could say general desktop virtualization and managed Windows. But this kind of stuff, you know, I don't want to look kind of too crazy far in the future because that's like a fun academic exercise. But that's not really something we can take back to our jobs and actually do. So I kind of want to look at, given everything we think about what's happening with desktop and Windows and applications and web and all that kind of stuff, what can we do today for, you know, to sort of prepare for that? Pardon me, I'm recovering from a bit of a cold also. I mentioned this earlier today, right, about how if you look at the current desktop strategy, you know, it's this, where we call Dell or we call HP and we ask them to just send us a pallet full of their second cheapest business laptops. And we joke, but it's kind of true that we order second cheapest business laptops because laptops, to me, it's like a bottle of wine where you don't want to be that asshole who buys the cheapest one, but you know they're kind of all the same. And so, you know, you order a pallet full of the second cheapest ones, and you spend a long time building your custom corporate image on this device, working with the vendor and the provider and getting all image and perfect. And before you even get the first shipment in, there's already some changes have been made. So now you have this kind of post-delivery procedure you have to go through to patch it and do a few things. And you do that for like 2 weeks. And then you kind of eventually say F it, and you're just re-imaging the whole things when they come into your company anyway, even though you spent all that effort building the perfect image that they will be provided with. And you know, and so you get these things image added to the domain, the user sort of set up on it, and you deliver these things to the users, and you kind of cross your fingers and sort of do, you know, hope that they don't break it too badly over the next 3 to 5 years. And maybe every once in a while you re-image it, and then, you know, 4 or 5 years later you do the whole thing again with a new batch of hardware. And that is the desktop, you know, for the past 15 years. And hell, the past 10 have been on Windows XP even. So, and nothing's really changed. And, you know, I always ask the question, so, okay, so if that's what we're doing today, you know, is there a better way to do that? Can we be more efficient? You know, there's got to be, this seems inefficient, right? And, you know, the people who are pushing VDI, you know, they have declared that 2006 would be, did you go to VMworld that year? I don't know if they were in Europe at that time, but I mean, VMware very clearly said 2006 is the year of VDI. Any questions? Now, of course, 2006 came and went, and we said, oh, Propro, no, we need a different, okay, you know what? 2007 is the year of VDI. That's the year that we're going to get it figured out and worked out. And actually, well, okay, we got 2008, because the protocol, 2009, we need better density. And wait a second, if I can fix my storage, and image management. But now 2012, we got it all done. We just bought Winova. So now we can say definitively that 2012 is the year of, I don't know, BriForum 11, I guess. And so this is the thing, and this is what I talked about this last year when we were at Chelsea Stadium. That okay, it was 2011 last year, it's 2012 now, and this is what we did for our desktops the past 15 years. And as I mentioned earlier, this is what we're doing for the next 10 years or so. And I look at that, and I don't know if I can find a problem with this. Like, this seems fine to me. So the first thing I want to say is I sort of frame the conversation as we look at what the future of the enterprise desktop looks like. I want to let you know that I have no problem with the way it is today. So I'm not coming at this like, oh, we got to change, we gotta rip out everything and make all this new stuff just for the sake of being new. Because like most of us, it's human nature to kind of be lazy. And even those of us who have a lot of energy, I mean, if we've been doing this for 15 years and it works, I'll use my energy to go mountain biking or something instead of using my energy to redesign how I'm delivering the desktop. So I don't want to change just for the sake of changing. So I want to take that sort of as a underlying theme of what we're doing here. I'm looking at sort of what we have to do as IT, not what we get to do. I don't know if that's even right, but it's my reality. So, okay, and then the other stuff I touched on in the opening keynote, but I want to kind of hit here for sake of completeness, is if we're talking about the future of the enterprise desktop, note the word enterprise in there. So, you can look at the future of the desktop of what you're going to buy at the electronics store, and it's going to have flat screens and touch and Windows 8 and that kind of, and integrate with Media Center and watch television and that sort of thing. That's all fine, but that's not what we're talking about today, right? That's sort of more gadget-oriented desktops. I want to look at, for us as IT professionals, the desktop that we deliver to our users. What is that going to look like? And as I said this morning, in order to ascertain what that looks like, we have to first define what a desktop is. Because for a lot of us, if I say, what is a desktop, in your mind, close your eyes and picture a desktop, you either picture this thing, or as I said this morning, you picture like the literal desktop Windows operating environment that you have. So if this is sort of what we have the idea for the desktop now, I mentioned earlier that this is a complete picture. When I say what is the desktop, you'll describe wallpaper, UI, icons, start menu, user environment, and all of these kinds of things. And for years, this is what we have delivered on our client devices, on laptops and desktop machines installed locally. And I mentioned this VDI technology came around, and we said, hey, we can transform the way you deliver desktops by going, bink, delivering the desktop from the data center. Which is funny that, as a quick aside, our transforming the way we do desktops was best case just as good as the desktop we could have delivered the old way 5 years ago. Like, how do we transform this VDI desktop? We disable wallpapers, we disable arrow, we disable search, we disable users' ability to install stuff. But fundamentally, though, this supposed transformation that VDI is, as I said before, it's a form factor change. It didn't transform shit. It's the same desktop. It's the same Windows. It's the same application issues and stupid user tricks. It just happens to come from a different execution location, but who the hell cares? And it's the same as I mentioned with terminal servers. So fine, we share desktops among users, and we make their settings with roaming profiles instead of making their settings locally. So what? The same thing is true with client VMs. Client VMs, offline VDI, local VDI is going to change the world, is what probably I said in 2008. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's the same old desktop that just happens to be popped in there. And this is what I mentioned also this morning is, so we had this, you know, and Citrix talks about FlexCast, and I talk about how desktop virtualization is more than VDI. It's VDI, terminal server, client VMs, all this kind of stuff. But really, again, these are all form factor changes. That's like saying, nah, man, desktops are more than desktops. It's about desktops and laptops, and Dell and HP. I mean, OK, yeah, there are differences and different driver sets and nuances, but it's the same desktop at the end of the day. And this is also, as I mentioned this morning, you know, as soon as these phones came out, we started putting desktops on these the same way that we have been doing desktops for all these years. And like, this is how we solve the mobile phone issue, is by delivering desktop. Because, and as I said, this is not our fault. This is all we know how to do. Like, you look at the phone and you're like, man, phone apps are badass. But my apps are Windows apps. So yeah. And then you're like, oh yeah, phone, I would love to use my phone. OK, you want your data? Sure thing. It's on a file server, SMB-based file share. We got this VPN to access it. And there's no VPN client for iOS. So you know what? I'll give you a desktop running in my data center. Yeah, then you can access it that way. You know, so like, this is, I don't know. It's all we know how to do. And so when you look at kind of, you know, looking ahead to like this desktop of the future, you know, we're really good at predicting the future based on what we know today. Or I should say, there are very few of us who can actually envision a future that is completely far out. And there's a very famous example of Henry Ford. Have you heard this? Like, when Henry Ford was designing the Model T, I mean, cars, now he didn't invent the car, but for the most part, it didn't exist yet. And he said, if I had asked my customers what they want when I was designing the Model T, they would have said they want a faster horse. And so we only really know how to sort of describe what we think the future is. So when we say desktop, what are the required elements of a desktop? A wallpaper, icons, user authentication, start button. And I'm delivering that desktop to a different form factor. OK, fine. But it's got to have all these things to like look and feel like a desktop. And it's interesting because it doesn't just stop at mobile devices. Because now people are talking about the cloud. And cloud-based desktops, you know, cloud is all the rage, and this is going to transform how we do business and all that kind of crap. And so there are now cloud desktop providers, right, that provide your desktop in a browser, browser-based desktops. This is the future. You want to picture the future now? Yeah, there it is. Look, it's in a browser. Ooh. But like, what the hell, you know? And this is the same thing because like, it's all we know. It's got icons. It's got a start button. It's got a way to launch applications. This is the future. And again, you know, if we're thinking of the future as future versions of what we know now, I mean, there's so many examples. Like, do you remember the predictions of, so once Apple, it was known that Apple was going to make an iPhone because of the trademark filings and all this kind of stuff. I'm not making this up. The day before Steve Jobs announced the iPhone on stage, this is the secret mock-up so the industry had created. Yeah, right? Because, I don't know, phone plus Apple, if you had never seen an iPhone before, it's what, Mac OS on a phone, or it's an iPad, it's an iPod with buttons for a telephone. So to me, a lot of the future desktop that people in this industry talk about is this shit. You know, it's the cloud desktop with buttons and icons. It's the Windows desktop on my tablet. That is the future. When I watch people talk about the future and I hear people talk about the future, that is the future that I see and that I hear. And to me, that's total shit. Like, this is not the future of the iPhone, right? Nor is Windows on your iPad and the icons in your Chrome the future of the desktop. Let's take this back, though. We're IT professionals. most of us, if not all of us, have delivering Windows apps, Windows desktops, desktop management. This is the big part of our job. And for most of us, a big part of our careers. I've been working 16 years in IT. And 16 of those 16 years, I've been concerned with the Windows desktop and delivering the Windows desktop to users. And as I said, we've gotten good at recognizing there's flexibility. So I've used this example in years past where, let's say all these blue boxes are our traditional desktops. And we deliver them the traditional way, Windows installed locally. OK, 10 years ago, we got terminal server. And we turned some of our traditional desktops into terminal server-based desktops. Now, maybe for some of our users, we made their only desktop was a TS desktop. Or maybe we made terminal server desktops available for all of our users, but only for use when there were remote access or like certain line of business applications, things like that. We didn't paint our whole picture green. We didn't all go to terminal server. And then the same thing happened with VDI. And this is a big point I make in the VDI delusion, that no one's trying to, well, sales reps, no one apart from sales reps are trying to convince you to convert your entire company to VDI. And it seems that it's highly unlikely that you will be able to do that. But I feel very confident saying that every company can use some VDI. Maybe it's only 5 or 10% of their users, but it probably makes sense everywhere. And we've got the same thing with client-based virtual machines, the same thing with OS streaming. We've got all of these different ways of delivering Windows desktops to our users. And as I said, so here, to me, this is a complex picture, of course, by the way. And as I described this picture, I was speaking, it was in Australia at a Quest event, actually, and one of the guys in the audience said, this is complex right here. If you're talking about delivering desktops via VDI and traditional Windows and terminal server and streaming, like that's way more complex. And I kind of said, yeah, I know, right? And he goes, well, so you're advocating complexity. And I said, hang on, man, you got, well, hang on, mate, I guess. You have a problem with cause and effect here, right? Like, yes, this shit is complex. But this is not the cause of the complexity. This is the effect from the business complexity. The business is the ones that want to work from iPads and anywhere and work from home and have redundancy so they can have a snowstorm and then 2 days later all the users reconnect back in again. But the only way you can make this not complex is by viewing these different modes of delivering desktops as just a form factor. So as I said, to me, VDI is a form factor, nothing more than a form factor. I don't want companies to have VDI strategy or client VM strategy. I want companies to have Windows delivery strategy. And if you look at how you manage Windows, how you manage the Windows applications, the Windows user profiles, then it shouldn't matter to you whether it's a VDI Windows or a client-based VM Windows. And when a client-based VM comes in, people are like, oh my god, but that's different drivers, and I've got to learn it works differently. OK, well, when new laptops come in, when BIOS went into EFI, like that's, stuff changes. We just have to learn and go with. And in fact, if I look at all of these blue boxes here as traditional desktops, really, there's no company where these are all the same color anyway. If I actually show the different builds of Windows I need, it probably looks like this. So a lot of people, when talking about the future, we're talking about the future desktop here, right? I'm talking about Windows. Hey, you got your big laptops, little laptops, fast workstations, big desktops, terminal servers, streaming, VMs, type 1 hypervisors, VDIs, all this kind of stuff. What's the one commonality amongst all this? It's Windows. This is all about delivering Windows, which is fine as long as Windows is able to provide a good experience. The problem with this, I talk about this as just different form factors. Well, let's use an analogy. Like other products come in different form factors. Same shit, different bottle. So do you know Miller High Life, by the way, in the US? This phrase here says the champagne of beers. It's about $2 for a 6-pack. So that's, yeah. But the point is this here, we talk about this as this is, there's all this flexibility. We can take Windows and deliver local and fast and remote and all these different kinds of things. But it's still Windows, right? And it's, it's the same crap, different bottle, regardless of what we're doing. So as we look to the future of the desktop, we have to balance out, OK, what can we realistically do with Windows that we deliver to our users versus where do we need to move beyond Windows? And then also, we have to recognize that we live in a Windows-based world. The reason, as I said, that we deliver desktops, Windows desktops, to our iPads is because all of our apps are Windows apps. And all of our user security is Windows-based user security, and our data is Windows-based file shares. If we knew how to just magically click our fingers and deliver all these apps as iOS native apps, we would do that tomorrow. But the reality is that our environment is a Windows-based environment. And unfortunately, the fact that we have a Windows-based environment really, really makes our lives suck. Because as you know, Windows, the kernel that we use, even moving forward into Windows 8, was first released to the market in July of 1993. So we're like getting really close to 20 years ago. And you know, this was the laptop. This is the highest end, most badass laptop in July 1993. And you know, Mac users were still there too. Look at how much sleeker and sexier it is than anything that a Windows partner could make. Hottest cell phone from 93. This is like legit true. And like the tablet market was this. There was before US robotics pilots, we had the Newton. And the copy of Windows we use today, even as we go from Windows 7 in our organizations to Windows 8, as we go from XP to 7, all of this Windows, there's literally lines of code that are the same basic lines of code from 20 years ago in there now. When in those days, one copy of Windows equaled one user, which equals one computer. And of course, the whole world has moved on past that now, except for Microsoft licensing. And Windows, and the reason this is hard to get off, because it's hard for us to move past, because as I said, we as IT professionals have our entire, the desktop, everything that we manage and deliver to our users is that packaged desktop. And it's so tightly interconnected. And Microsoft deserves a lot of credit for this. Because you know what Microsoft did? In July 1993, Microsoft Windows NT was not the leading operating system for businesses, right? There was OS/2 was a big thing they were competing against. And so what did they do to make this stuff popular? A, Visual Studio, free. You send us a letter, we'll put the disks in the mail and give them to you. So whereas the other OS/2 developers was like hundreds or thousands of dollars to get a developer kit. All the DLLs and licenses, it was free to write software. You didn't have to pay money to them to use their OCX controls and or whatever they were back then. I don't remember. MFC. All that stuff. So you don't have to pay anything for that. You just got to use all that. Also, they let developers do whatever they want. You want to hard code your file location to C:\myApp? Yeah, go right ahead. You want to require admin rights for this application to work? Sure thing. Who is Microsoft to say no? Yeah, bring it on, bring it on. You do whatever the hell you want. And 20 years later, that's one hell of a hangover we have now. Because you know how it is, like, yes. Oh, these are really sugary drinks. Wow. It seems good at the time, because like, hey. But now we get to this, and now we're trying to see, I wonder if we can roll back from Windows or change the way Windows works a little bit. But we have 20 years of developers, both commercial developers and our own in-house developers, having free license to do whatever the hell they want with essentially no repercussions. Because what happens? If you require that your users have admin rights to use your application, you know what the downside is? Your application always works. Oh, that's an upside. Security? That sounds like a customer problem. Users, wanting to share images. I mean, this is all, it's fine. So this copy of Windows today, it's like an add-on. It's like the house that's been added on with no central planning or no central design. And now we have this piece of shit that is the desktop. Like, this is our targets as admins. This is what we deliver. And yeah, it's all duct tape and chewing gum and baling wire holding it together behind the scenes, but damn it if it doesn't work. And if the way to make it work on an iPad is to like get this thing propped up and somehow miraculously working in our data center and remoting the user interface to it, once it's up and running, we back away slowly and say, yeah, go ahead and use it, because now I'm putting my desktop on your iPad. And so we all know that moving forward, we can't have this, right? We know that this is meant for keyboard and mouse. This is meant for not having users share base images. This is tied to specific pieces of hardware. This is not meant to roam. This is not meant to allow users to install their own applications. This is not meant to have users have different versions of the browser at the same time. Huh? So, but this is all we have. And so this is all we have now, but we know that this isn't the way that we're going to be moving forward. And so this is kind of like what I was mentioning earlier today. We have to dig into this and look at how we can start to break this apart and untangle everything that we have, unfortunately, unwillingly created over the past, literally, 20 years. And this is what I mentioned this morning in the keynote. I went through quickly, but I want to re-highlight these now. If we look at what that tangled mess of horror that we call the desktop is today, it is many things. It is the hardware interface of the OS. It's the kernel and the memory interface and the screen graphics display. It is that interface. It is the UI, right? It's re-scroll, resizable windows and close and maximize and minimize and window flipping between multiple applications at the same time, that sort of thing. It is an application runtime. The desktop is a Win32 or an x64 desktop that can run Win32 Windows compiled executables. It's a runtime. I can just give you this app knowing that your desktop can make that app work. It is an app launcher. It's a way for the user to select and run new applications. The desktop is that provisioning target. I can say, you need Word, you need this internet shortcut, you need this document. I can pop those onto your desktop or your start menu or your home drive, which is also accessed via this desktop. It's a way that users receive data and applications. It is that application integration. Have you ever thought about how significant app integration is in a desktop? Like for real, like Ole stuff? Dragging and dropping, I mean, cutting and pasting. I can right-click and, Control A, Control C, grab the picture, Control V. I can drag and drop things into different formats. I can take tabs from the web and put them into Excel, and they work automatically, and data connectors. It's that common, I guess we'd call it the framework, the APIs, all the communication channels between how all of the different applications interact with each other. The desktop is that security container. As I mentioned, you log into the desktop, then everything you run, everything you touch, everything you access is accessed as you, and your credentials are carried forward. So I can target the user and everything they do when I'm targeting security. And then finally, it's that configuration container. So when I say, here's your data, here's your apps, here's your settings, what are the boundaries of all of this? That is the desktop. Now, during the keynote, I mentioned that we can all sort of academically agree, in principle, let's say, that, yeah, I can see this. The desktop is all of these different parts. But to us, though, over the last 20 years, all these different parts only came together as that Windows desktop. So it's like saying the car has, okay, tires and wheels and engines and spark plugs and seats, but you buy a car. Like the only way you get that is a car. Even though we know it's made up of these parts. But now we're starting to see that users, this was fine when users only used devices with keyboards and mice and fast processors and copies of Windows running locally. But now that users are using different devices that have different user interfaces, now we start to see, okay, if we deliver the desktop as that one monolithic chunk to these users, it's going to be a bad user experience. And I mentioned earlier, because the only way is the joke I said when I was putting this Windows desktop on the iPhone, that's how this stuff works everywhere. If I give you a browser desktop, and it's just an HTML5 client connecting you into a remote desktop, now your local software has a way to switch apps, but your remote Windows has a way to switch apps. And you log into the remote Windows, which is different from logging into local Windows. And the same with the applications and the provisioning and all that kind of stuff. So we all know that no one wants to use a Windows desktop on their iPhone. Incidentally, Microsoft lost the mobile OS with Windows CE 1.0 in 1997 because it had a start button, flat out. Because that's fine for a screen, but when you're on a device this big with 320 by 240 pixels, they were gone. Like that was the day that they lost it. And then, so of course, when Apple created iOS, there's all this rumors that Apple iOS and macOS are going to merge together into one OS. That's asinine. Maybe they'll do something where they put an ARM chip in the new MacBook Airs so you can side boot a little light, something that can share storage, something like that. But think about it. This OS is designed for using multiple fingers with not a lot of precision, small screens, not lots of flipping back and forth, which is exactly the opposite of what a desktop OS is designed for, with precise pointing device, multitasking, huge real estate, lots of local processing, etc. So we recognize that taking our desktop that's designed for keyboard and mouse and delivering that to users on different devices does not make for a good experience. So how do we make that a good experience? We've done it so far because that's all we knew how to do. But in order for us to make this into a good experience, this is the same story that we've been talking about in the desktop virtualization world for 5 years now, which is to focus on the applications. And if you look at this, what I mean by focusing on the apps is, I showed you all these things that made up the desktop. I have an app launcher on here, I have a UI on here. I've got the hardware interface that connects to the memory. I don't need to deliver my own version of that. It already has that. But these users need apps. So for me, as the IT professional, I need to make sure that the users have access to my apps. And now, whether these are Windows apps, touch apps, that's a whole different conversation. But if I'm giving services to a user on an iOS client, you better make damn sure that your applications show up as normal icons in iOS like everything else. And on Android, the same way. And if it's something where on the Mac user, I never use launcher. I use the command space and type in WO, and it auto fills Word, and then I enter, and that's how I launch Word. So if my Word is being delivered to me remotely, I better be able to type command space, WO enter, and have Word launch. And the same kind of goes on and on. So by looking at the individual applications, we can start to see how we can break up those 8 pieces that made up our desktop and layer them out on different types of hardware. So for example, I took those same 8 boxes I had before, and I put it on a cell phone here. And right here, I've got 4 of the boxes. If you can't see this, so of all those 8 boxes I had, then I said the desktop is these 8 different things, right? 4 of them are very hardware specific. The device hardware interface, the app launcher, the UI, and the local app integration, so how cutting and pasting is working and that kind of stuff. So you can imagine that if I, as a corporate IT pro, am delivering a desktop to a smartphone user, I don't need to deliver these 4 parts of the desktop because that user already has them. They're built into the OS of that device. And the thing is, those 4 elements that are built into that device are also built into traditional server desktops and laptops. So same thing for a laptop. Hardware interface, there's an app launcher, there's the basics of a UI, window management, and the application integration, alt-tabbing, and cutting and pasting, that kind of stuff. That already exists there. So already, I'm looking at if I used to be delivering the whole Windows desktop, there was all 8 of those things combined. Now I've automatically cut 4 of them off of my list that I don't care about, because whatever device you have, hell, if it's a thin client, you have these things. So I don't need to deal with that anymore. OK, 4 down, 4 to go. The next 3 I'm going to look at are all user-specific. The security container, or maybe I should say the security context of who the user is and what they can access. The provisioning target, which, by the way, ought to be user, right, not device. I don't provision the app to the device. I say, Bob gets Word. And I kind of don't care what device Bob is using. Maybe I put some context around if I'm like doing geofencing or something like that. But the provisioning target is user. And then that configuration container. The configuration container was that combination of apps, user settings, user data. So I ran out of time to find an icon for a user. But like, pretend these are all user things, right? So of my 8 pieces that make up a desktop, 4 of them I can ignore right off the bat because the user, whatever device they have, by definition, already has those 4. The next 3 are user-centric. Now, I have to set these up somewhere in my environment, but ideally, that somewhere is going to be centrally, right? And I don't know whether that's in Active Directory. I don't know if it's in like Zen desktop database with applications. I don't know if it's in the VMware Horizon App Manager database. I don't know if it's in some cloud identity management thing. That's irrelevant for the purposes of this conversation. The point is, you can have your users and say, these users get these apps, connect them to this data, and here's the context of what they can do with these apps. So that's 7 down right now. Of the 8 things that a desktop is, that's 7 of them that are out of the way, and the only thing that leaves is the app. I mentioned a desktop is an app runtime. So the app runtime, of course, so we have, when I say app runtime, I mean like, there's the applications, of course, but application is sort of a generic like concept. But an application, really, a Windows app, Win32 runtime, it's an iOS app, it's an Android app, it's a web app, which kind of has 2 runtime components. There's all of the shit that runs in the back end that I don't really care about. And there's like, whether it's HTML5, whether it's HTML plus Java plugins, whether it's HTML plus browser plugins, whatever. That's the runtime. So all I have to deal with now is my app runtime. And incidentally, as I'm dealing with the app runtime, this is not, this is a very device-specific conversation, right? Because I don't want to say my app runtime for Word is Win32. But I don't want to deploy the Win32 version of Word to everyone, because if you're on an iPad, the Win32 version of Word that exists in the world today requires a keyboard and a precise pointing device. iPads don't have those. So if I want to give you Word on an iPad, I probably want it to deliver something like a quick office to you. But maybe I want to manage that myself and provision it myself. I want to say, hey, you need Word. When you are on a device that's running Windows, I'll stream Word to you. If you're on a device that can't run Windows locally but has a keyboard and mouse, I'll give you a remote Word. And if you're on an iOS or Android device, I'll give you Quick Office. And that's where my app runtime comes into this. So my point is that all of this delivering the apps, we can look at these 8 different components that make up this thing called the desktop and kind of peel out 7 of them and focus kind of just on that app runtime. And that's what I want to kind of take this next part of the conversation. Now, whenever we talk about app runtimes, the sort of next thing that happens is it almost immediately devolves into an argument about desktops versus tablets. And everyone talks about how, pardon me, tablet apps, touch-based, they're nice, they're simple, they're focused, they're clean, people love them, versus the desktop is the desktop apps or the old apps. And you hear all this stuff like, the desktop is dead. We are in a post-PC era. No more PC, keyboard is dead. You hear all this stuff, right? Steve Jobs, the day he announced the iPhone in 2007, declared the PC, we're in the post-PC era, I think. Paul Moritz is saying this. Templeton said this 2 weeks ago at Synergy. So all of these people are talking about how the PC is dead. And I don't believe that it's true, by the way. My sense, to be honest, that when most people say the PC is dead or the desktop is dead, what they're really saying is Windows is dead. But maybe I should even say, maybe they're not even saying that the Windows as an OS is dead. Maybe what they're saying is that desktop that we were managing for the past 20 years as a monolithic device, that's what's dead. for us to have to deliver the desktop and the DLLs and the licenses and the user environment and the user apps and the security and the runtime and all that gunk just to access a Windows app, that's going away. Now, interestingly, I don't believe that Windows apps are going away, and I don't believe that Windows as an OS for devices is going away. I do believe that our role as IT professionals, as having to manage this monolithic Windows piece of shit, that is going away. But moving forward, when we hit this post-apocalyptic nuclear meltdown, which, by the way, I hope I'm in the demo lab at that time, because I think we'll be very secure down there. When this happens, we will have still, the world will be full of, I'm sure, cockroaches, Twinkies, and Microsoft Windows apps. And I'm fine with that. I don't believe that we should try to move off of Windows apps anytime soon. I mean, look at how many mainframe apps are still out there, right? I was talking yesterday to HMRC, and like all the billing software for the government, I guess, that's all mainframe apps. And I fly United Airlines as I live in San Francisco, and they just merged with Continental, and they use a mainframe-based passenger management system. Of course, all their terminals are Windows 7, but you lean over and they're running, attachmates connecting back to that. And really, what's wrong with that? It's fine. So I am not one to go out and say we ought to get rid of all these Windows apps and that we ought to move and migrate off of them. And because in some cases we can't. In some cases, it's sort of cost prohibitive. And in other cases, it just doesn't matter. And that's what I want to kind of focus on, because remember, I started this conversation by saying people get in arguments of desktop versus tablets, right? Like, which one's better? And people are like, the PC is dead. All I carry is my tablet with me when I travel. Do you ever hear this, like, as an argument of why the PC is dead? And I'm like, okay, that just means, like, awesome for you that you only travel with a tablet. Because I feel bad for you that you were using a PC for the past 20 years when you traveled, when you could have only used a tablet. That's cool. But ask these people if they threw away their laptop. No. And it's just, you could argue the same thing with my BlackBerry. Like, there were scenarios where I used to take my laptop with me until I had email on my hip, and then I'm like, oh great, I can go out and monkey around all day and pretend like I'm working with my BlackBerry instead of doing so with the whole laptop. So just because there's all of these anecdotal stories of people replacing their laptops with tablets, no one's really replacing laptops with tablets. It's only that they're adding tablets into their environment. So that said, we're focusing on these applications, right? And as IT professionals, we have to deliver the applications to the users, to the right form factor, the right device, and how they want to use them. But every time we start these conversations on how to deliver apps, we get into these big arguments about desktop versus tablet, which apps are better. No, device native, HTML sucks, which ones are going to happen. And it's my belief that every time people are arguing HTML native, PC touch app, there's like 5 different arguments that are happening at the same time. And that argument will never, ever be resolved because no one realizes they're all arguing in like different dimensions. So what I do when I talk about this conversation of how we deliver applications to our users and our devices, I break the argument down into its core bits. 4 core bits of this argument. The first is, I have written here native versus HTML. Maybe that's not entirely accurate. Maybe I should say native app versus platform-independent app. Let's say it like that, right? Because there is this misconception that platform-specific native apps are better than platform-neutral HTML apps. My argument is that is complete hogwash. And let me give you a couple examples. Gmail, mail.google.com, right? You go there. I go to the same exact URL, and I have this version of Gmail, or I have this version of Gmail, or I have this version of Gmail. And it all depends on which URL I access. It depends on which device I'm accessing. I should probably back this up, or else you guys are just going to read my email all day. The point is that that last one, by the way, was HTML5 Gmail offline. I don't know how many of you use that. It only works on Chrome. It's amazing. I actually use that as my primary Gmail interface because it's way better than web-based Gmail. Wait, it is web-based Gmail. What am I saying? See? It's hard. But the point is, that is an HTML app that is fully featured and can do everything. And a lot of people say things like, oh, you know, but platform native apps are better because they can access the camera and the GPS. Do you hear that argument? Camera, GPS. That's what everyone always argues. Well, web browsers have had APIs to access cameras and GPS for like a year. So that's not a valid argument. And by the way, web browsers are revved every 6 weeks. How often is the platform revved? Like once a year or two? So my feeling, really, in a lot of cases, is that it's not that HTML apps are shittier than native apps. It's the HTML app cited in the example is worse than the native app that people are mentioning. They compare Outlook to Outlook Web Access. Well, Outlook Web Access is a piece of shit. But it's a piece of shit because it's a piece of shit, not because it's HTML-based. They could make it awesome if they wanted to. And there are other open source and third-party email web-based like pop clients that are amazing. And they work offline and have caching. It just happens that Microsoft Outlook Web Access is not one of those. Incidentally, a lot of these reasons, people always use Google Apps as an example also. Because they're like, man, you ever use Google Docs? Google Docs sucks compared to Word. I can't do anything in there. But OK, maybe that's true. But it sucks compared to Word because A, Google Docs is like 3 years old, and Word is 20 years old. And Microsoft has had 17 extra years to bloat it. And secondly, Google made a business decision that you can't pick what font your letters are. That's a Google business decision. That's not because HTML5 can't type in the number of the font you want. It's because Google doesn't let you have that. So you can say that Google Docs sucks and be right. But let's look at cause and effect. It does not suck because it is an HTML5 application or an HTML application. It sucks in your mind because Google didn't give you the features that you wanted. So as we're looking at how we deliver applications, whether we deliver device native applications or whether we deliver web-based device-independent applications, that's part of the conversation, but don't be lulled into thinking one is better sort of automatically. Another interesting part of this, incidentally, is that people talk about cloud apps. I want to point out here that, well, this is just a bad example. I'm showing Outlook, like real Outlook, and Outlook Web Access, right? So some people will say that, oh, like I like native apps because like I can use offline all these better kind of features. But keep in mind that just because the app runtime is native, here Outlook is a native Win32 app or native Mac OS app, or there's native Mail.app for iOS and Mail for Android. But those apps don't do anything without the backend side. So you also have to separate the runtime of that client user interface from what the app is actually doing. I absolutely consider that Outlook is cloud-based app. My email's on my internal cloud or the public cloud or private cloud or whatever. But Outlook is absolutely a cloud app because it doesn't do shit without its connection. It just happens that there's a runtime local, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a cloud or not an internet-based app. So that's the first aspect, is native, platform native versus HTML. The second thing, when people are arguing about applications, is they always argue the touch versus the keyboard and mouse. And they say, you know what? Touch is better because no one wants to use a keyboard and mouse. Or keyboard and mouse is better because it's more precise. But what's kind of funny? They usually confuse touch versus keyboard and mouse with the app runtime. Because they say, oh, iOS, touch is awesome. Windows, keyboard and mouse is awesome. But remember, that's like an illegal move. We're tying these two things together that are not related to each other. And for this, look at HTML apps, web apps, in general, kind of suck on the iPad because the iPad is acting like a desktop browser, and these are desktop-based web pages that I'm accessing, and desktop-based apps are not meant to be used with multi-touch and imprecise touching. But look, I'll go back to Gmail as an example. When you access Gmail from this is screenshots from the internet, by the way, so anything here I cannot vouch for. When you access Gmail from your iPad, they don't give you that Gmail interface I showed you before. They give you that awesome, nice Gmail interfaces made for your fat, greasy fingers. Same when you access it from the iPhone, mail.google.com. It's the same URL, different app, right? So my point is I use this to establish precedent that just because an app is HTML or web-based doesn't automatically mean it sucks for touching. And the same is true in reverse. How many of you have Windows 8 preview on your laptop? You play with it, right? How many of you enabled Windows 8 Metro UI to play with? Yeah? How many of you have a multi-touch laptop? Yeah, Metro kind of sucks, doesn't it? Metro with a mouse, it blows. So my point is it works both ways, right? If you are assuming that users have touch and you give them mouse-based apps, or you assume that users have mice and you give them touch-based apps, that's a horrible experience. So my point is as we're looking at the applications, whether you touch the app with your fingers or whether the app is meant to be used with a keyboard and mouse, it has nothing to do with what platform the application runs on. It also, incidentally, has nothing to do with whether that app is a full-featured app or, as they call, a focused app. And that's the third point here. People argue, nah, man, users, they don't want to be distracted by all those extra bloatware features. They mentioned Word as an example. They want the clean, slick, fun, really awesome, just touch it with their fingers kind of app. And now hang on. What was the illegal move there? They threw touch it with your fingers in with simplicity. Whether an app is a simple app or whether it is a full-featured app has nothing to do with what platform the application runs on. And it has nothing to do with whether the app is a touch-based app or whether it is a keyboard and mouse-based app. The reality is that because a lot of our web apps are newer apps, the developers flat out haven't had time for them to bloat as much, and they tend to be more focused. And because we're all marketers at heart, we just market that as the point. But the reality is that you can go back to it and say, I can use an app like Keynote. There is a version of Keynote that runs natively on my iPad, and there's a version of Keynote that runs natively on my Mac. This is the same app. One of them is full-featured, and one is limited feature, focused app. But I could run a version. I could make an app on here that's a very basic, like PowerPoint Viewer. I could make a very basic desktop app that didn't do a lot of stuff, and I could, if I wanted to, put 1 billion features into the app that ran on iOS. It's just that because, again, we've only been writing this iOS app for 2 years instead of 10, then there's not as many features there. And that, incidentally, is the third core piece. And these two things relate, by the way, to the fourth. And the fourth is create versus consume. So what is the purpose of that app? If it's content creation, that means that you're sitting down, focused on that application and on the task at hand. You probably have multiple screens. You probably want to use a mouse because it's way easier on your arm. I mean, have you ever used like one of those computers you have to reach and touch? People are like, oh my God, Apple ought to make touch-based iMacs. How badass would that be, right? Yeah, that would suck. Hopefully Steve Jobs made that known before he died. Because if you sat there with that thing on your screen and just reach your hands out to touch your computer, that's awesome for like 3 minutes. And then you're like doing one of these, and then it's like, maybe like you lay the screen down on your desk so you can rest, because you're like, man, I love this interactivity, but I wish I could like rest my arm on the desk as I was somehow interacting with it. That would be awesome. And so, of course, when you're creating PowerPoints, you got 5 tabs of browser open. You have Word open with your notes in it. You have the image editor open to like mess with your images. You have PowerPoint open in 2 screens. I use 2 24-inch screens when I'm doing PowerPoint, and frankly, that's only because the Mac Mini that I use only has 2 monitor holes in the back. If I could plug a third one in, I'd use a third one. Don't get me started on that Matrox crap. And so the point is that when you're focusing on an application, you want keyboard, mouse, and all this kind of stuff. But when I'm running around and consuming content, I don't need a billion features. I don't need keyboard and mouse. I can drive my presentation from my iPad. I can watch movies from the iPad, that sort of thing. So again, what the app looks like and what the features of the app are has to do with whether the user is creating content with it or consuming content, which has nothing to do with whether the app is focused or featureful, has nothing to do with whether it's a touch-based or keyboard-based, and it has nothing to do with whether it's an HTML or platform native. So what I want to establish here is that as we are looking at the different types of apps and delivery technologies for these applications, we can mix and match from different categories. So it's not like it's keyboard and mouse equals HTML5 equals full-featured and tablet equals touch equals native. We can completely mix and match those as we go forward. So I was talking about, remember, we're all focusing on apps, right? Because those other 7 things of the desktop kind of got out of the way a little bit. So we're focusing on apps. But all these apps, so how do you decide what's where and who's where and which apps and which technologies and platforms and delivery mechanisms? Well, the way you do that is classic, as we've always talked about. You pick which apps by focusing on your users. And I've been using these slides for years when I talk about our fantasy world of IT professionals is that our users are all identical drone copies of each other. Which, terminal server, eh. So, but the reality, of course, is that users are, each their own with their own personality and apps and combinations and ways of working and all that kind of stuff. We cannot make a strategy that is a bespoke strategy for individual users because we'll drive ourselves crazy. And we'll have to buy 40 billion different products for, 40 million pounds to get every little nuance use case for every little kind of scenario. So the only way that we can build a strategy for how we're going to deliver these different apps for these different users is to start to create some logical groupings of our users. Now, fortunately, I don't know how many of you are UK citizens here. The majority, most, half, I don't know. Your government is doing an amazing job. This is like for real serious. So I'll give you the website, cabinetoffice.gov.uk. And if you go into the resource library, so this is the UK government ICT strategy resources. Go to the bottom of this page, end user device program, the conceptual framework. You can download a PDF. It's a 60-page PDF of how, at the cabinet level, they're prescribing how they will deal with devices. So it goes down to MOJ, Home Office, as I said yesterday, HMRC, and all the different departments of how they're dealing with end user devices. And they have this 60-page framework that describes how they are looking at the users, how they're classifying the users, and how they're looking at delivering technology and device access. And it is fucking brilliant. Can we say, I guess it's, yeah, all right, well, there it is. Legit, man, like legit. And I am shamelessly pulling some content from what they do. So I'll tweet this, or I'll throw it in the BriForum group later, but cabinetoffice.gov.uk, and then maybe Google search for UK government ICT strategy. So this end user device program, what they're looking at taking all the users they have and creating different classifications of types of things the users do to figure out the devices and the applications that they will deliver to them. So for example, they're looking, and this is all in that paper, they're looking at application usage. So what apps are you using as a user, right? Is it like line of business apps? Is it knowledge worker apps? Is it like what do you actually have to do for your job? They're also looking at the location and mobility. So do they work only in the trusted location? Do they work in a remote location? Do they work, are they mobile users who are working all over the place? They look at the usage frequency. So for these applications, are they always using the applications all day long? Are they only using them occasionally here and there? Are they, intermittent? Is it spikes? And then finally, they're looking at the app, their interaction with the app. So do these users, are they creating content? Are they managing content, changing, editing? Are they purely consuming content? And this way of classifying users is one way to sort of break this down. And by the way, they're not the first ones to have like a scheme for classifying users in this way. It's just that because of the open government, all their project documentation on this project is all online and free. It's free to the world. I mean, which is great because like yay for government. So this is, I like it because it's not from a vendor, and it's like pretty good. And they have, I don't know how many users, a £60 billion budget. I don't know what their IT budget in the whole UK government. I don't know what their user count is. Hundreds of thousands, I guess. I don't know, million. I don't know. But it's a lot, and they're doing it, and we can just take that work and like implement it in our own environments. So I like it. And notice here, by the way, they don't mention tablet versus Mac versus laptop. They don't mention these kinds of things, but they look at how they can start to build and classify the different user communities and the different types of users, and then figure out whether they deliver device-native apps or HTML versions of apps. Do they rewrite HTML apps? They have a very big program where they say, hey, VDI is expensive. How much would it cost for me to write a new UI that's HTML-based but meant for touch? Maybe I can do that cheaper than VDI if I have an app that a user needs to use via the iPhone. And so they take all that into account. And of course, I just described 2 pages of their 60 pages, but there's a lot there. So as we're looking at these applications and focusing on these applications, we're looking at the app technology and the way we're delivering it and the devices and all that sort of thing. But I want to kind of circle back to Windows a little bit, because I mentioned that this session is about the future of the enterprise desktop. But I also mentioned that everything that we do and have done for the past 20 years as IT professionals has been about Microsoft Windows desktops. So I want to kind of quickly talk about, so where does that leave Windows? If we're looking at native apps and HTML apps and touch and iOS and different things like this. So because people want to know, is Windows dead? And I kind of say, when it comes to desktops, again, that we manage as ICT professionals, maybe Windows is on its way out. And this is over a multiple year kind of thing, but maybe it is on its way out. But when it comes to apps, though, as I mentioned, Windows will never die, and which is fine. Which means that Windows becomes middleware for us. Windows is just another middleware platform for our existing applications that are Windows-based that are never going to die. And at some point, right now, we are managing Windows endpoints because that's all we know how to do. But at some point, as more and more of our apps become HTML apps or delivered via app stores or via app virtualization or delivered via our data center, we're going to realize, hey, it doesn't make sense for me to actively manage that entire endpoint as something for that specific user. I can just deliver my apps as sort of a middleware service. So Windows in the corporate world, I mean, absolutely becomes, we pull out that app runtime, right? And the app runtime is delivered in whatever way makes sense. Incidentally, whenever people talk about the future of Windows, if you Google for the future of Windows, you get this. And I don't know. This is not the same thing as this, right? Because remember, 8 different pieces. This piece is the app runtime piece that we as ICT professionals care about. This is the device UI and the device hardware interface and that kind of stuff. Which, okay, this has to exist. And if users buy their own Windows tablets, then if they buy their own Windows tablets, they're going to have this. If they buy their own Android tablets, they have the Android interface. If they buy their own iPads, they have the iOS interface. That's fine, right? So yeah, maybe this is the UI of the future for touch-based Windows apps, and that's fine. But we don't care about this as ICT professionals, So that's when we're looking at Windows, like I said, for us it's middleware. And because again, when we're focusing on applications, I mean fundamentally every application mechanism, every application scheme has its own pros and cons. Windows apps have pros and cons against iOS apps, which have pros and cons against HTML5 apps, which have pros and cons against DOS apps, I guess. And it's all everyone has their own pros and cons. And so for every application and framework, we have to sort of figure out the pros and cons and weigh those. And so for Windows, I talk about this future world where, hey, we're delivering apps, we're delivering the app runtime as a service separate from everything else, right? And we can say, yes, the future of Windows from the ICT professional standpoint is delivering individual users' apps. How do we make Windows do this? People are like, oh, God, that sucks because it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. And I say, yeah, it does suck. But, you know, Windows apps are Windows apps. And there's not much we can do about that. So it is absolutely like putting a square peg in a round hole. And we shave it, cut it, pound it, smash it, stomp on it, whatever we have to do to jam that square peg into that hole. You know, HDX, PC over IP, Windows app blast. Because even if we deliver, if users want to use a Windows app from an iPad, maybe we're not delivering the whole Windows desktop to overwrite that. We still have to deliver that app. Maybe we're frame hawking it. Maybe we're JavaScripting it. I don't know. We got to do something. And that's that. So Windows apps have pros and cons. You know, web apps have pros and cons. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but just as an example, web apps, hey, what sucks about web apps? It's a single desktop app. So I deliver you 5 apps, and it's like one icon. Or else I put shortcut applications on your desktop, but now I'm managing those separately. And how do I multitask with web apps? Alt, tab, tab, tab. Like my 3 web apps are stuck together in the same tab. Unless I make the tabs separate, but then I get use Alt, and that doesn't work. So how do I provision users on web apps? You know, how do I provision the shortcuts to my web apps? How do my web apps integrate with my desktop beyond cutting and pasting? How about the web apps, they all write their own UI with their own drop-down and feel and buttons and look and feel and everything? How about the personalization? I configure my time zone and my spelling dictionary 15 times in 15 different web apps. And then again, but there's pros and cons. So after you classify all your users and use cases, you look at the pros and cons of Windows apps, you look at the pros and cons of web apps, you'll look at the pros and cons of iOS apps, and you'll make an app-by-app decision. But the takeaway we're having here is this sort of app-by-app decision. So what I'm going to do in the last like 5 minutes, I'm going to look at specific action items, because some of this has been like kind of heady about like sort of the theoretical future and stuff. But what can we do today to like implement as we get back? And by the way, I have a session tomorrow. I think it's in the morning called like What Next or What Now. That's sort of like a workshop section. What's that? End of the day. Great. Because the idea is that's more like a workshop of all the stuff we talk about at BriForum during all these days. Like, what the hell do we do when we go back to work on Monday and like make it happen? So, but kind of a preview for this. You know, hey, we know we have to manage Windows. And so today, that might be application virtualization. That might be apps on terminal server VDI and data centers. Might be apps installed into our OS. It might be adding a user environment, user virtualization on top of that. We know we have to manage the Windows environment we deliver to our users, regardless of how they're accessing it. We know we have to do MDM, MAM. Do you know this mobile device management, mobile application management? So Jack, my brother Jack, he's the guy that writes on Consumerized IT. He's like me, but skinnier and talks slower. He has a session tomorrow morning all about mobility. So, because you know, it used to be you have to have a BlackBerry to lock down devices. But now you can lock down iOS, even Exchange ActiveSync over the air. There's free tools from Apple to lock down iOS, to lock down Android. But then do you lock down just the apps or the whole device? How do you fit remote wipe in? Can you remote wipe just your apps versus not the user's personal photos and all that kind of stuff? So as users are bringing in their devices and you're delivering devices to users, you have to start to do something with the devices. There's like 50 different products out there that do this stuff. A bunch of them are free. So there's that we can start to do. We have to do data management. I mentioned this earlier today. There's like 50 companies that do data synchronization. Pick one. And if you pick none, your users will pick one for you. So it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier. Your users will definitely be using one of these. It's your choice if it's the one you want or it's the one they want. But we can start to take we have to get our file, our knowledge worker data out of the file share behind the VPN. Speaking of VPN, we're seeing changes and evolutions to our network security. So before, the office was a physical building. We had resources in the office. Users were in and out of the office. By definition, the office was our security boundary. If you were in the office, we trusted you. If you were outside of the office, we did not trust you. That doesn't work today. Because I showed you, like the video I showed before, you can bring untrusted devices onto the network here, or I can take trusted devices off of the network. And if I take trusted devices off of the network, then and I make the users jump through all these hoops to get back on the network, then they're just going to say screw it and use Dropbox on their own anyway. So I like the idea of getting the firewall off the office and moving the firewall and VPN onto the resource we're trying to protect itself. And then this wall doesn't matter. Have free open Wi-Fi to all the users in the office. Maybe you have a password so people don't like park in the parking lot and use porn. But other than that, you know, and then you've got this, and now you can have servers, cloud, local, wherever they are. But your VPN connection, you need to bring that in from the office towards the resources you're trying to protect. Open email. You got to have pick a version. It could be secure IMAP or something like that with two-factor authentication. But if your users, there's a million web apps out there that use email, and your users need that. So it's your choice as to whether it's your Exchange server, or as to whether your users are just forwarding all their email to Gmail and then doing it that way itself. That's the tech target approach, we call it. So get the email open to the world, because there's a billion apps that use it, and your users will use that again. It's your call, whether it's on your terms or their terms. So the final kind of bits, I have some truths, and I apologize. There's like these are kind of wordy. I got 5 truths about the future desktop. So number 1, Windows desktop applications, like the existing Windows apps today, will be around for a long time. That is fact 1. Truth number 2 is that today we can break the desktop down into separate core parts, which we frankly couldn't do even a few years ago. But we can do that today. Break out the data, break out the user, break out the apps, break out the device, break out the security. 3 is that users are going to have all different devices with all different form factors and all different OSs. And you can't make a device-specific strategy because you're always playing catch-up. So we got to figure out how to embrace every device, no matter what the user is doing, in a way that doesn't freak you out. 4, if you tell the users they can't do something, they're going to do it anyway, even if you're secure. Ever heard of Bradley Manning? Google for WikiLeaks. So users are doing whatever they want anyway, and the threat of firing them doesn't matter because they can get a job at your competitor while you're explaining to the MPs why you lost 2 million customers' data. And then the 5th truth is that mixing these new Windows desktops, or mixing these existing Windows apps with this new future desktop is going to be very clunky and kind of suck. But you know, that's kind of the way it is. So the future desktop, when someone asks you what the future of the desktop looks like, we have to figure out, are they talking about the future of Windows? Are they talking about the future of the PC? Are they talking about the future of keyboards? Are they talking about, you know, the future of end-user computing in general? Because the future desktop can mean different things to different people. But the one takeaway, though, is that the desktop is no longer a single monolithic thing. It is these things. And now we just have to look at the technology bits to break it up and deliver it to all the users and all our devices. And with that, counting down to 0, I might have blasted through Q&A time a little bit. Is it, we have to switch to sessions, right? Yeah. So, hey, look, I'll be around tonight at the party and stuff for questions, comments. You can, you know, like respond on Twitter and all that kind of stuff. Thank you for letting me talk exactly 75 minutes out of 75 minutes. And thanks for coming to BriForum.